I can't answer the question, what's the right diet to feed my pet or what's the right feed to feed the herd, I can't answer that without first understanding the patient or the herd, what their needs are, what condition they're in, what their life goal is, that sort of thing. I can't answer that without understanding the diet in question. So what is it providing? What is it not providing relative to the needs of the animal? And I can't answer that without understanding the conditions under which it's being fed.
Hello, this is Dennis Jewell with the Pet Food Science podcast, and I have a great opportunity today to talk to Dr. Amy Farcas. We want to talk about the difference between sort of the biological truth that's the base and maybe the marketing hype that's what the consumer hears, and how to tell that apart. So, Dr. Farcas, if you could introduce yourself and sort of tell us how you got to this space and why you're interested in this topic.
My name is Dr. Amy Farcas. I'm a board certified veterinary nutritionist. So for those who aren't familiar with that set of letters, I'm a veterinarian who's also specialized in nutrition. I have done a lot of different types of practice, both in my career pre-nutrition and pre-specialty, and since I became a nutritionist. I've worked in academic settings, and I've trained students and done a lot of speaking and teaching to veterinarians. But my heart has always been in client education, and that goes back to the days of, long before I went to vet school. I was just helping clients in exam rooms understand what was going on with their pets, and that was always my most valuable place in my career. And so when I became a nutritionist, I had the opportunity to start my own practice and really examine, at the time there were almost none of us in private practice, really examine why that was and what were the barriers to that being an effective specialty in practice. I did that. I operated Veterinary Nutrition Care as a one-on-one, mostly in-person solo specialty practice for a long time. And
that sounds difficult.
It was hard. I had really designed the practice not to be a successful practice, but as an experiment. And so there was a lot of data collection just from my personal experience in what clients were really truly looking for, what was going well and what wasn't. And, there's not a practice management software or things like that are designed to support the types of data we collect. And so a lot of things were done by hand when they probably shouldn't need to be done by hand if there were more of us doing it.
Sure.
But when COVID came along, life responsibilities meant that practice had to go on hold. And I came back to it several years later with fresh eyes. And talk about blessings in disguise. That was a really, really cool opportunity to look back. And it became really clear that what I had was two different populations of clients, and they don't sort themselves. They won't identify themselves differently. But what I had was one group of clients who had patients who had usually more complex medical conditions and really truly needed a specialist level recommendation for what and how to feed their pet. And so these are patients who have combinations of things like diabetes and kidney disease and heart disease that are all sort of having some conflicting nutritional management at some level. And that client is less personally concerned about what the choice is to feed, but just that their pet eats something that's appropriate and sustains them. And in that case, the specialist consultation model works really well. It does exactly what is supposed to do, and that's what a clinical nutritionist is really trained to provide. So I have colleagues out there still to this day doing exactly that. But my practice now, or my business now, is focused on my other client, which usually has maybe a less medically complicated patient, but at the same time has a lot of questions. They have a lot of information, and they are no less motivated to figure out what works best for them and their pet. And a lot of this has to do with information they've absorbed through marketing or other sources where they have opinions that may or may not be based in.
It may not be true, right?
Fine, yeah. I was trying to be a little gentler than that, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
And yes, that's fascinating to me because you have these two different really needs. They're both correct needs. But as I evaluate what you're saying, one is quite willing to take the expert's opinion. They are relying on that veterinary nutritionist. That's the role you have. And they're saying, I don't know this area. I'm going to find out what's right from you. The other comes in probably somewhat well educated. I always wish they had a good education, but they have probably read quite a bit, and they don't necessarily have a good capacity to separate what's right and what they're reading for what is wrong. And so they come to you maybe with a greater need, with a more difficult experience, at least, to walk with them. Is that right? Is that how you're seeing it?
That's exactly right. And the other thing that's happened is I think about all the information that people are exposed to as this sort of swirling sea of things that are variably true or not true or opinion-based or, true under some circumstances and within context. But there's no way of sorting it out and weaving it into anything useful. It's just a basket of stuff. And what I have realized is that, doing the same process of deep dive, the pet's medical condition, the client's needs, this is the one perfect recommendation for this situation. The outcome with that client was, yeah, okay, but I still have more questions. And yeah, okay, but what if I want to change something? And so that was really the proof to me that here is my perfectly formulated expert opinion is not truly what they wanted. These people seem to be looking for more of along the lines of a guide. They want to take that energy that they've been spending researching and trying to find the right answer and actually be able to use it to find the right answer instead of spinning their wheels in more mud. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, what is happening is that this process, the next reliable, helpful resource is usually my veterinarian. But at the same time, that asking that veterinarian's opinion and asking them to sort out stuff that veterinarian may not really be equipped to myth bust, debunk, sort out, provide framework for, that veterinarian's recommendation just becomes another bit of stuff added to the basket of things that don't really help and contribute to a meaningful decision for them.
They're not finding that compelling. Maybe 20 years ago, or even 40 years ago, when I started kicking around in this area, I'm feeling old. That was a compelling piece of information. This is what my expert believed. I'm not going to challenge it. They're right, almost by definition correct. That's not true today, is it?
It's not, because people have access to so many other information sources that really feel credible. And that's really where I am with what I'm teaching people now, is how to sort that out and how to find what really matters to you and get down to a framework for making your own decisions that works with your veterinarian. It absolutely is always going to need their input, because I'm not going to train people to be veterinarians. I'm not going to train people to be nutrition specialists, but I can teach them to sort, organize, and prioritize information.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think when I work in that area, I'm really talking to basically pretty advanced, well-grounded scientific people. And so you can talk about these sort of criterias of support and building up from, my friend says it, the expert says it, the peer-reviewed journal article says it, the well-run prospective article says it, that maybe just off the top of my head might be my progression. I know a lot of people like meta-analysis. I like it less than most. But what do you say? I mean, you're not talking mostly to that individual. How do you help them walk through this really confusing area?
Yeah, and this was hard for me to sort out how to articulate. And so I'm really glad we had this opportunity to bring it up and really, really define it for me. But what it is I really like that levels of evidence pyramid. It resonates with me. It makes sense. And I kind of love it.
Well, walk through it. I did it very short and without thinking about it. You think about this all the time. Walk through that level of evidence pyramid for us.
Well, I actually don't do this all the time, but because I'm talking about it, I pulled it up just so that I could make sure that I had it right. But so what we teach to scientists, and keep in mind that we are teaching this to scientists, so experts with depth in a particular field. So the levels of evidence or evidence-based pyramid is this image where we have a pyramid shape with things like background information and expert opinion at the bottom, and then gradually increasing strength of evidence as they go up. And so the next level up is things like case reports and bench studies, and cohort studies are up from there. And then we have things like randomized controlled trials. And then towards the top, we have things like synthesis and systematic reviews or meta-analysis.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. As a scientist, I love the organization of it. But I can't teach that to lay people because I'd have to first teach them to be a scientist. So they would have to understand study design, and they would have to understand nutrition science and biology and chemistry and physiology. And I'm not taking anybody through medical school here. And I'm not getting anyone a PhD in anything here. But what I realized that I was doing without knowing it is what I have done is I made sort of a lay people evidence-based pyramid. And what that looks like is, same sort of image, but it has things like TikTok videos at the bottom, just random, my brother's girlfriend's somebody said that dogs do this because that.
Often with a real experience, right? They had an experience where they fed all beef, grass-fed beef to their pet, and the pet got better.
Something got better.
That's right. They had an experience.
We have no idea why, and we have no idea what context that's in, but right. Something got better. And so that's not completely invalid. And I want to stress that. That doesn't mean nothing, but we don't always get to know what it means.
And it's hard to make that a universal, this is a normative experience. It was a very individual experience.
Oh, yeah, potentially. It may be universal,
You stop breathing, you don't do well. Okay.
So next up from that is things like friends and family. And I'm going to go backtrack one second here. I've talked about how the concept of evidence levels resonates with me. The other thing in nutrition that I saw for the first time and immediately said, yes, that explains so much to me, is this concept of the circle of nutrition. And what that is for people that might be listening is this idea that says that I can't answer the question, what's the right diet to feed my pet, or what's the right feed to feed the herd, is I can't answer that without first understanding the patient or the herd, what their needs are, what condition they're in, what their life goal is, that sort of thing. I can't answer that without understanding the diet in question. So what is it providing? What is it not providing relative to the needs of the animal? And I can't answer that without understanding the conditions under which it's being fed. And for pets in homes, that's the owner and the family feeding the pet, what their needs are, what their concerns are, what their philosophies are, what's important to them. For an animal in the clinic, it's the staff that's around and what their opportunities are. And in a herd situation, it's the management. And so that what that triangle, what that circle looks like in different contexts, who's in each portion differs a little bit, but it's always the same concept of environment, food, and patient, or individual or herd. So now that I've introduced that, we can't answer nutrition questions without understanding all of these components. And then once we do, then we can make a recommendation, we can make a change, and then go back and implement it and see how it affects all of those components. That's the full circle of it. And I realized that what I was doing with this, new version of the pyramid is that person on the internet, twice removed, TikTok video, whatever it may be, they have no connections. They don't understand you, they don't understand your pet, and they don't understand the diet that you're being fed. And that's got a lot to do with why that's not all that relevant. Likely not all that relevant. Next level up, there's things like friends and family. So their experience may be a little more valid because they know you and they understand to some extent what's going on with your pet. So that person's experience and recommendation may be have a little more validity. Up one chain are things like one step in the pyramid are things like your breeder. So not usually a science-based knowledge, but there's usually some really deep knowledge there about what may be going on with this type of dog. Dogs are my most common patient, so I default to dog. But this breed is consistently, they like company to eat. It's not that they have a poor appetite. It's just a habit of, they don't like to eat when they're alone. So you hang out with them and they eat just fine. Things like that. Up a level from that is your veterinarian. That person has the really depth of knowledge when it comes to that patient, and a reasonable amount of knowledge about diet and the individual feeding, because you've had a relationship with them. That's why it's important to have a relationship with your veterinarian, is they understand you and what your needs are. That's also why it's important to be honest with your veterinarian about what's important to you.
And maybe honest about what you're feeding them.
Absolutely. Critical.
My son keeps coming in with hot dogs. I don't know if that's good for my pet or not.
Critical piece of information there. The other thing that happens when you bring your veterinarian into the loop is you're then accessing the scientist that has understanding of research methodology and the available body of data out there on whatever it is that we're talking about. And then lastly is, if you want to go a level higher than that, and often we don't need to, is you have some sort of a specialist who has an even greater depth in a particular area of medicine or nutrition, as well as probably a greater depth in terms of the diet evaluation and being able to tell what is and isn't provided by a given diet. So those levels are informed that way. And I think that's something that pet owners can understand clearly enough. But the other thing that I teach people, it has to do not so much with sorting out, prioritizing different types of research, to be able to tell that this type of claim is more valid than that type of claim because it was based on, whatever type of study. That's not really realistic for pet owners. Similarly, other ways that we go about evaluating research or teach experts to evaluate research are things like, does this come out of an institution that has a history of, venerable research in this area? Does the author, have credibility in the area? Is it sponsored? Where's the money coming from? That's a big thing. But those aren't really realistic for people to sort out. And the other thing I don't like about that sponsorship question is it implies that anything that is funded is invalid.
Oh, let's talk about it a little bit because I worked for industry a lot of my life, and I was always so frustrated that someone who was at an industry setting who obviously had a product to sell, they would be very open. I'm employed by this industry company. We sell products in this area, but my academic friends are going to start kicking at me, but they have tremendous bias. They have a grant they have to support. They have an idea that they're desperately trying to sell, and they never declare the bias. It's never an interesting thing to the scientific community, as if that bias didn't exist. And I assure you, it's a significant thing.
Right. And understanding what bias exists and where it comes from, that's another level of expertise that is not really fair to ask pet owners to understand.
No, it's difficult. But I want to chat about it a bit because, at least for me, it's fascinating because we have a bias as industry experts. We have a tremendous bias of this is accepted as true. And when you come out with that thing that says, ooh, maybe what we believe is not quite right, it's very difficult to get that published.
Threatening.
It can be tremendously threatening. And I understand that. We don't want to, I'm going to believe that cats need lysine for the rest of my life. I don't care what else anybody says, but sometimes you think, why? I always thought this to be true. Maybe it's not so strongly known as I have believed, and that's hard. That takes some wisdom, some introspection that maybe not so common.
Yeah, well, exactly, and it also takes a level of understanding of how research works and how industry works and how politics works and how funding works that isn't really realistic for lay people.
So yeah, let's get back to that, Dr. Farcas. I want you to help me. I'm thinking about my friends who they buy food, they ask my opinion. I like that circle of understanding. That's helpful for me, but I'm not so sure it's helpful for them. They want to go in and evaluate these claims, and how do you help them?
So I've found that the simplest way to help people understand, sort out the sea of things, is sort of a multi-step process. So first is to understand that there are probably not as many as we think terms that have meanings and terms that don't. So for example, this is always where I start. Language is important to me. Defining terms at the start of any discussion is, I think, a really important step. So I want people to be looking for, if they're trying to judge anything, what examples, what terms actually matter, or what terms have real definitions. And a lot of these are AFCO related, but things like feeding trials. Okay, that's a real thing. That means something. This is formulated to meet the nutrient profile for whatever life stage. That is a meaningful statement. This is complete and balanced, or this is supplementary. Okay, those are real terms. They mean real things about diets.
So what are some terms that really, they only have sort of contextual meaning and maybe are a little more fluff?
Yeah, that's the next thing. Is there's also terms that you want to call it fluff. Let's go with that. Things like biologically appropriate or clean, and my personal favorite is high quality, because it leaves the definition of those completely open for interpretation. And the rest of the marketing that goes on the package has a lot to do with how those things get interpreted. I don't want to fall into a trap of sounding like I think marketing is bad. I mean, all marketing, everybody does it. It is necessary. It is literally just a normal part of our life. My pet peeve is using sort of a fear-based marketing approach. When I get upset about marketing, it's really that. I'm not opposed to using terminology that doesn't have a definition and leaves it up to people to decide what it means, because we also need to be able to make choices about, this one feels more aligned with what I want than this one, so I'm going to buy that. It's not that everything has to be packaged in the same way and using the same terminology.
Sure. We wouldn't want that.
Yeah, but when we look at it that way, when we define our terms and we know what does mean things and what doesn't mean things, then we can look at our marketing objectively and talk about what it means and what it doesn't and what's up for interpretation and where that intended interpretation is leading us. And then the important thing about that is how does that place we're being led to make us feel? I think that psychology says that when we're making choices that are good for us or aligned with us or the right choice, according to our values, we tend to feel pretty calm about it or balanced, even if it's a hard choice that we might not really love. But when we're choosing something based on anxiousness or fear or feeling threatened that if we don't do this, then we're somehow harming our pet, that's not right. I don't want people to have that.
It's
and
hard.
So that's really the marketing that I dislike is that approach. And I do ask people to think about how that product or that marketing makes them feel. If their word is anything that's not positive or neutral, then I ask them to think, walk back through to how they got there, and then we'll land on words, and then we can talk about what words mean.
This is a difficult subject for me because we're really asking people to make decisions that matter. They care about their pets, but they're not experts in this, and they've got a lot of choices, a lot of opportunity for maybe good things. I mean, I think, I just don't trust that anybody's out there trying to harm pets, but the best is still not so easily seen, is it?
Yeah, exactly. But when we teach people what words mean, what claims are really being made, then we can sort of get them out of this, carrying around this tangled basket of mess. And I can get them to at least say, these are facts, and we can line up the facts. Then when they end up at the point where they have these conflicting facts, my pet should be fed a complete and balanced diet. Okay, yeah, that's usually a fact. And my pet has chronic kidney disease, so he should feed something that says it's not complete and balanced. Okay, I might need an expert. I might need a resource to straighten that out. And that's where our veterinarian comes in. Yep, I can help you sort those. But it's the difference between, remember when you're sitting in your high school class and, teacher asks, are there any questions? And someone goes, yeah, what was all of that? This totally thoughtless, effortless, I didn't understand. And it's essentially an unanswerable question. When the question is, I know you said this, and I understand the basis for this other thing, but how do I reconcile those two things together? That becomes an intelligent question, and it becomes answerable. So I can say, yes, Fluffy should be fed a complete and balanced diet, except that her kidney disease means that she should be phosphorus restricted. And therefore, her diet is complete and balanced, except that it's phosphorus restricted. And yes, that's oversimplification of a few things, I know.
No, but it's a good example because a healthy pet and what's optimum for them is not at all what's necessarily optimum for that same pet in the development or in management of a disease. And that's the foundation there.
Yeah, absolutely.
At Trow Nutrition, we blend our passion for customer success with our love for pet nutrition, bringing together the art and science of nutrition, ingredients, and blending. We're here to dream with you and help you create standout products. We're here to deliver for you with dry ingredient, pre-mixes, base blends, and specialty blends. And we're 100% dedicated to you with a complete focus on pet nutrition. See what Trow can do for you at trownutritionpets.com.
We've kind of used our time. If you have someone come into your space and say, okay, I have my pet. We've talked about the healthy because I think that's a little harder. I think I have my pet with this disease. they're going to rely on the expert in front of them.
You would think, but often it's still not. Often it's, I know that there's this modification needed, but I don't like the diet that's being recommended because it has corn in it or byproducts or whatever. So there's still the same battle of, I have absorbed some stuff that's not necessarily all that relevant and accepted it as a fact and put it on an equal playing field with this recommendation that my pet needs a certain modification to their diet. And so we still, food allergy is another huge area where that exists.
Wow.
So we still have to have that same kind of discussion.
Yeah.
And what the step that comes next after we sort out terminology and, arrange our facts sort of in a line is then we can prioritize them. We can say that this falls under the you category, this falls under the your pet category, and this falls under the diet category. And I need you, client, to sit down and define what's really important to you in each of those categories. And then we can pull in what other facts support and don't support. And, I know that this particular aspect is philosophically important to you, but maybe once we clarify the context for it and the definitions behind it, maybe it becomes a lot less important. And now we can feed that renal diet because you're not so worried about ingredient X, because the thing that you were worried about, ingredient X, turns out to not really be a fact. My last thing that I do in this process is when I don't think other aspects of nutrition do this. I think this is a medical thing, is when we approach patients or write medical records, we're doing it in a certain format that really specifically clarifies our thought process, so that when somebody else picks up our medical record, they can say, oh yeah, this is the data that was in front of them. That is what they thought about it. And that is the plan based on that data. And then the recheck follow-up instructions will be there as well. So it's a communication tool and documentation. But I do the same approach with each of those three items, and I teach clients to do it. Here's my data. Here's what's important. Here's my summary of what to do about it. And here's the plan based on that. And people can do it if we give them the framework that allows them to sort, prioritize, and organize it. They can come up with this. In my program, I call it their personalized pet nutrition guide, meaning these are my priorities. This is how that information gets sorted into my priorities, and this is how it informs a decision that not only does what my pet needs it to do, but does what I need it to do. And it works. So I have packaged that into something that I'm going to be teaching live to a cohort of students for the first time as an online course. I've done it a lot one-on-one, and I've certainly done it a lot to veterinarians and veterinary students, but this will be my first time teaching live online to a group of clients.
Well, that's great. That's perhaps a good place for us to kind of wrap it up. If someone was interested in that information, and I think this has been a fascinating introduction to it, how would they go about? Can they just do an internet search for you, Dr. Amy Farcas, or what do they need to do?
My main homepage website is being built as we speak, but my sort of active site to get to right now is veterinarynutritioncare.com/signup, SIGNUP. That will put you on my priority list so that you will receive emails about Full Circle Pet Nutrition, which is the name of this program, as it comes about. And my priority list will get an exclusive invitation once we have enough people ready to go and actually run the course.
Well, thank you. I think this has been very interesting to me. I hope that if you've been watching this, that you drop some comments. I think Dr. Farcas and I will both read them, and maybe we can hear from you as well. But Dr. Farcas, thank you for your insight and understanding of this, for sharing it with us today. For Pet Food Science Podcast, I think we'll just sign off for now.
Thanks, Dennis.